Welcome to Humans of Techlandia. I'm your host, Kate Cockrell. During March, the people and culture team at Tao is taking over the pod, and we are exploring the human side of the massive tech shifts happening right now. Each week, we're going to be talking to different Portland-grown leaders about what they're seeing in their work and personal lives and what that means for the rest of us as we're all navigating rapid change. Today, I am so pleased to have Gilley, founder of 52 Limited, a talent agency that has spent more than 20 years connecting marketing, design, strategy, and tech professionals with forward-thinking organizations across the United States. Brooks also brings another lens that to me matters a lot right now. He's the father of teenagers and young adults who are all stepping into a workforce that looks pretty different than the one we might have started in. So let's explore this moment today, what it is, how it compares to the past, and what should concern us and what we have to hope for. Brooks, welcome.
Kate, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I am so thrilled to get to talk to you today. Before we get to the big questions, you heard my intro. Is there anything that you'd like to add about your background that feels relevant to our conversation?
Well, I'm a proud Portlander. I'm a father of 3 kids. Hopefully, I'm a quality husband to my wife, Carrie, and I'm a son to my aging parents, and got 2 pups that I take care of on a daily basis too. So I've got a full household.
That's right. It's a busy time. So I want you to take us into, understanding your vantage point in owning a talent agency. If you've spent 2 decades placing talent, you probably developed some pattern recognition. What are some of the cycles that you've seen in placing talent for 20 years that people might miss?
Well, my work is very much based on supply-demand economics. People come to us in moments typically of growth or re-engineering in their businesses. And there are some consistencies certainly throughout the different cycles that I've worked through. I came out of college in the early 90s during a recessionary cycle. It was very hard to find work at that time. I also worked as a professional, and specifically in this industry during the dot-com rise and crash, the 08, 09 Great Recession, COVID, and now a moment I think we're going through now, which in some ways we'll talk about later, but I think is quite a bit different than those other pure economic cycles. So being an older professional, I think that there's some pattern recognition that I have. And they're all different in some ways, and then they're all similar in some ways. So as it applies to talent, we're seeing for the first time a pretty significant upheaval. I cut my teeth, if you will, in the marketing, advertising, design space, which is a very dynamic industry, known for boom and bust, very analogous to like a Hollywood model, comes together and it breaks down.
Mhm.
The difference, I think, in this cycle is this is the first significant disruptions we've seen in the engineering space. Certainly over the last 3 or 4 years, and now with the rapid push towards large language models and a lot of work being done through the code they provide, it's really changed the landscape. So again, significant change, which is not an anomaly in the space, but this is a different type of change, I think.
Looking at it from the employer side, how has that changed what employers are looking for?
Well, interestingly enough, I mean, the last 5 years have been the most dynamic in my career with regard to the labor market. If you look at 2020, we were probably at the tail end, or at least economists said, of a growth cycle. Things were slowing down. Employers were reconsidering headcount. The contract side of our business had slowed down significantly, and employers were really kind of putting the brakes on a bit. And of course, in March of 2020, we know what happened. And the first 6 months of the pandemic, our business fell apart completely.
Mm.
And we were, like many small organizations, in the midst of PPP loans and, gosh, how do we keep people employed? And are we going to keep this around? And how long is this thing going to go? And, it's fight or flight. I mean, it
Mm.
was a big part of it, right? And then June, I don't remember the day, sometime in June of 2020, it took off like a rocket ship. We're all at home. We're all doing video conferencing. And the demand for the type of professionals, both visual design as well as people who code, if you will, it was just insatiable. On top of that, because you have this significant cultural moment where people can reconsider, hey, you know what? Here I am at home. I'm with my family. I've spent the last decade or more commuting an hour and 15 minutes a day. This reconciliation of like, who am I? Why am I doing this? This job I'm in is just, it's a black hole of hell. Get me out of here. I'm changing everything. So you had this great, great change where people had opportunity to move and shift and take different jobs, and people were moving from one side of the country to the other side of the country. I want to be closer to family. I want lower cost of living. All these conditions changed all at once. And as a result of that, in a practice like 52's, keeping track of that acceleration of change was incredible. Never seen anything like it.
Mm-hmm.
The demand of clients coming to us and say, hey, I need not one or two or five, give me 7 of those people who have that skill set and are able to do it. Well, hey, you know what? We found 7 people, but your budget doesn't really true up to what the expectations are of talent and what they're looking for in compensation. All right, well, we better throw money at it because we have to have those people. So you saw an employee-led cycle in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
So when we got to around, let's just call it 2022, 2023, saw an inflection point, probably in the fall of 23, September-ish. Could see that things were changing. Monetary policy had shifted because of inflationary cycle. Money got expensive. Innovation, startup, venture capital, PE tends to slow down during those cycles. We started to come out of the pandemic and people were looking for physical experiences. And all of a sudden, the demand for digital enablement started to slow down. Now, take that a bit forward, and we had an entrenched, obviously, inflationary cycle. We had political change. We had tariffs last year. And as a result of all those things, now we're on the other side of an economic cycle, and it's an employer leveraged market. And employers are reasserting their, expectations on employees. So that could look like conditions of flat pay models. That could look like conditions of, especially employers who are enterprise scale, maybe large mid-market, there's an expectation of people return to work.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going through this dynamic shift in the marketplace, this pendulum, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it always moves from side to side.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sensing like you took the first 20 years of your career and maybe the last 5. I might be not adding up all the numbers here, but the cyclical changes that you saw in the first 20 years seem to be compressed and happening at a faster rate since COVID. Is that accurate to say? Like the
I, th-
pace of
I think I
change?
think it's I think it's very accurate. I think it's very accurate just from the sort of the math of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I come to this work as a human, and my job is to help people navigate their lives.
Yeah, and that's
And
the
so
question, the central question that we're looking at here today is this kind of human side. So I'm going to give you a chance to kind of talk about that. We've talked about some of the bigger forces at play and what you're contending with, both as a business owner and as a person who's facilitating, you know, talent, finding the right place to be, right, in the marketplace. Yeah, what do you see as a coach? What do you see as a business owner on the human side?
what I see as a coach and a business owner, that's a great question. I think that the rate of change from the digital side, so what I mean by that is the acceleration, the pace of where we are in the language models, large language models, their ability to do things that we couldn't even have considered a year ago, 6 months ago, and how that is moving forward at a breakneck pace.
Hmm.
Even the people who are in the major labs can't tell you when and how fast, but they're shocked too, right?
Right.
And then you counter that with human beings. And what is our ability to accept process and move forward with change? And that's what I'm seeing most profoundly is that people who never thought it was going to change, it has changed. And with regard to work, what I'm saying is an economic base that people expected is now starting to feel like, wow, is the rug being pulled out from under my feet?
Hmm.
Right. So being present with a person one to one, and helping them understand and digest and process what's happening. So a lot of the last 2 years for me has been keeping space for people.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. And I know you are the kind of person who, from previous conversations we've had, Brooks, that you have developed some of your own habits and skills around managing rapid change, given what you as a business owner have experienced in the last maybe 5 to 7 to 10 years. What are some of the ways that you maintain a positive outlook, agility, resourcefulness?
Well, yeah, I was going to start with, the question or like, what's kind of relevant in my background, if you will, for me
Yeah.
to navigate change. Well, part of it's just I'm old. So my I don't think my synapses are firing quite as fast as they used to. So maybe some of his stuff just goes past me. Um, but no, for real, I think that for me, when I look at like, okay, hey, where's my foundation? Where's the root for me? And I realize, I've done a lot of things in my life professionally. I've started my career wanting to be a professional musician, realizing that I was on the bubble of that skill. I became a music business professional. I've worked in the service industry. I've run a trade organization, and now I've been self-employed as an entrepreneur for, 20 some years. And so when I look at that, what is that core of who I am? And I'm like, wow, I've reinvented myself a number of times, not once, not twice, not three, not four. And I don't think that that's too dissimilar from where we are now. Our parents' generation had 3 jobs or 4 jobs. And I remember counseling people 15 years ago, you're probably going to have 3 careers.
Right.
That number now might be 5 or 6 or 7. So, what is the essence of that? I thought about like, what is that piece? And I think it's a willingness to be a beginner again.
Yeah.
Is just to be a beginner and because maybe because of my age And I care a lot less about what people think or people looking at me and just saying like, Brooks, you just got to wake up and start again and try. And I think that that is an essential skill of the moment we're living in.
Mhm. Well, I will add, one of the as a part of my business, part of my practice, I work with people who are in career transition as well. And as you talk about the idea of being willing to be a beginner again, one of the things that I think is bewildering about that, and I think is part of the fear that's in this moment for a lot of people, is becoming a formerly important person, I say, right? Like, what's it like to kind of lose your sense of professional identity and then have to begin again? Are you noticing that pattern too? Because in the work that you're doing with clients, helping them match them with employment opportunities.
I am, and I think I think especially with seasoned professionals,
Mhm.
maybe folks a little bit younger than myself or a little bit older than myself, and this inevitability of people who are executive leaders, and I work with a lot of folks who have gone through forced change. So they've been laid off or they've been given the choice of having to relocate. And, for them and where they are with their families, myriad different reasons, like, that's just not an option. My life is here, wherever here is. So this kind of forced, if you will, initial consideration of who am I? Am I defined by the role? Am I defined by the money I make? Am I defined by this sort of status that I have internal to an organization?
Mhm.
And I think the first thing is in career transition for me is to get people to do a high quality, healthy pause. Because in our culture, oh my gosh, I lost my job or I've been sort of engineered out of this company. I can't make this shift. And I'm already looking for the next thing. When I think in many cases, people don't even know what that next thing is. So a high quality pause in consideration of who am I? And I like to frame it in the context of we're really two parts of ourselves. There's the head part, which is the rational mind, logistics. How much money do I have to make? I don't want a long commute. I want to manage people. I want to be an individual contributor, all those things. All right. The cognition. But the more important question is, especially as we age, in my opinion, is to sink into the question to our heart is who am I? What do I want? Where do I find purpose and meaning? How, at this stage of my career where I've accumulated this professional wisdom, do I apply it to and for others? How do I become a mentor? How do I show up for people in a different way? How do I help young professionals navigate conflict in the workplace or, you know, lack of self-esteem around things, whatever those things are,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And those are the things that when you get people to pause and they consider like, "Oh yeah, hey, you know what? I can do those things," right? And it can open up a whole new lens of opportunity towards different types of roles that would be more in sync with who they are today.
Mhm. Yeah, it makes me think that one of the key mindset shifts that we may all be playing with in these huge transitional moments, because I think change is coming for us in so many different ways through all of these different identities that we hold, whether it's parents or business owners or person who works in specific industry or person with specific network, right? All of these identities are affected by this rapid change. And I like this pause as an idea of, a lot of times when change is forced upon us, we have this like, why is this happening to me? Or kind of this initial reaction to it. What you're looking at in your own career is maybe I'm the best person for this moment, given that I've owned four different businesses. So that's a little bit of you know, how do I personally tackle the future given my background and experiences? What change cycles have I navigated and how have I approached it? And then the other piece I think that's a mindset shift is what do I get to do now that I didn't get to before, right? What do I get to let go of? And what do I get to reinvent and create for myself that wasn't possible before?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's also, embracing what is and, for someone who is in their late 40s into their 50s as a career professional, I mean, I think the reality is that there are biological chemical changes that happen in our bodies in our being, right? That our synapses are not as fast as someone in their 20s.
Hmm.
And I look at that on my team, and I look at their adoption of AI in workflows and how fast they're moving. And so I don't move that fast, but here's the difference. That crystallis intelligence that I have as a man in his 50s and the pattern recognition and the years and decades of doing, I'm able to say, "Hey, yo, slow down a minute there.
Hmm.
What about that pothole you're about to step in?" Right?
Hmm.
And again, it's this wonderful, relationship between sort of youth and wisdom, right? And if those two things are firing at the same time, you've got something. But I need to be in the space of what am I applying? I'm applying wisdom. I'm not applying youth any longer.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, let's switch. This is a good segue to the conversation that I also wanted to have with you, which is you're not just sitting in this moment as a business owner and as a person who, you know, is running their own career and thinking about their own future and planning for retirement and all of these things. You're also a parent of young people. And I'm curious, as you look at it from that standpoint, what else do you notice?
I when I look at my kids, I actually my oldest child is working with me professionally.
Hmm.
And that's been a treat. And he's really, you know, dynamic professional, and I'm really proud of what he's doing. I have a senior in high school, and I have my youngest is going to be a junior next year in high school. And we're out of college with one, and two kids, trying to consider what they want to do next. And then on top of that, I'm also experiencing in 52's practice young professionals and how they're navigating a difficult economy.
Yeah.
And then obviously, AI being sort of this all pervasive theme that we're all trying to figure out. So, a couple things. This is such significant change for our industry. And I'm going to go to kind of take the professional piece of it first.
Hmm. And just to be clear, our industry.
Tech,
Hmm.
sort
Okay.
of the intersection, let's call it the intersection between visual design and technology. That's
Okay.
the space that we play in most. So, one of my concerns as being an advocate for talent is how do young professionals, either getting out of school or graduate school, what have you, how do people get their first chance? So, the careers and I would say the sort of the roles of the past were in the design field. You became a production artist and you learned craft, part of a team. You would assemble production elements in a campaign or some kind of a digital product. Look at the writing tradition for us. We spent a lot of time in communication and working with copywriters. You're a junior writer. You're doing maybe longer form writing as an example, and then you're able to kind of mature and more into conceptual writing. And then specifically, you look at tradition of engineering, and you cut you cut your teeth on production code and you're, part of a team and you're doing lower level tasks to not only develop skill, but also learning how to be a professional, how to be part of a project, how to be responsible for timing and milestones, how to manage your time, how to interact with other people on your team, how to develop collegial relationships, how to have friends, inside work and outside of work,
Mhm.
how to raise your hand when you get stuck, how to find a mentor, someone who's your advocate, someone who cares about your professional development. And when I'm seeing, because we're in entrenched economic cycle, especially at the entry level, and then obviously getting pushed, at least conceptually, by AI and tools and corporate investment in those tools, and the expectation in some way of a return on investment, that we're seeing less entry level opportunities. So on top of that, if you look at the last 5 years with the pandemic cycle, young professionals that started their careers during the pandemic, many of them were onboarded into work in a remote team. So all of their relationships have been on a screen for the most part. Now, that is changing some as we go to more physical experiences, and there's an expectation on the company side that people are going to come to work. So that's changing with some organizations. But a lot of technology-focused teams are still purely remote, and you start to think to yourself, wow, that person has had 5 years on a screen. And what is the quality of those relationships that person has to their colleagues as well as to their managers? So that's been a part of my experience with some younger professionals, kind of through my network. Hey, would you talk to my daughter? Would you talk to my son? They're 3 years in and they're at this sort of inflection point. And what I find invariably is the inflection point is they feel isolated.
Mhm. Mhm.
And, that's not good for them. And then I think to myself, I think about my clients and I'm like, that's not good for you. This person is sort of halfway between here and there engaged. That, that's not your most vibrant employee. So I think there's a real opportunity for companies to come into that space and use that as a superpower, if you will. Physical engagement, understanding how that onboarding experience for that professional is going to be, how to do gate checks with that person, how to get them aligned with, a buddy, if you will.
Mhm.
How do you open up the capacity for mentorship?
Mhm.
What's your formal mentorship program? Is it dialed in? Is it informal? What's the structure of that? So I think the companies today that really are in tune to that human essence, what is that physical, emotional experience that person is having, are going to be the ones that are going to have huge success, in my opinion.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think about I have teenage daughters, and I've done a lot of work with their schools and with kids their age, and I think particularly for this generation, I noticed simple things like, Brooks, you and I, when we were growing up, it was like there was a phone in the home. Someone would call us and we'd have to pick it up and say, hey, this is the, Cockrell residence. Who are you calling for? Right. Potentially complete stranger on the other line have to have this professional outward facing kind of thing from the age of 8, from the age of 7.
Yeah.
You're doing these kinds of things. And I remember working with my girls just to make some of those simple business calls, right? Is this business open right now? Are, all the way up to, talking with healthcare providers or things like that. And I'm astonished at how much anxiety young people today have about certain points of communication because of the infrequency of having to speak audibly with another person that they don't know. and assert a question or assert a, a point of view. I think this really speaks to what you're describing around I'm working with people. If I'm working with people online, how much of that's happening over DM versus actual verbal communication? And then how does that translate into a meeting where you want me to raise my hand and say something that I see it might be missing, right? To have those brave moments where our teams are actually asserting a perspective or, you know, influencing where things go. So I think I love the idea of mentorship. I wonder what else, mentorship within a company can create that, but what are some other things that I imagine a lot of people who listen to this podcast are also parents of kids. Like, how are you raising your kids to enter the workforce knowing what you know in terms of what they're going to experience?
I mean, there's a couple of things. My father was a college professor, and you know, he was a fan of liberal education
Hmm.
and the power of the generalist, right? Be curious about a lot of things, right? And I was raised in that household. And so when I got out of school, it was in an era of, oh no, you can't be a generalist. You need to be a specificist. And we suggest you get an MBA,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? The rise of the MBA.
Or
Everyone had an MBA.
some kind, right? You got to get a master's of some kind to contend.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Hmm.
And during this time we're living through, which I call it this threshold moment,
Hmm.
it's a threshold. It's not, again, one of these economic blips. I think this is like a big change, is that adaptability, curiosity, willingness to lean into new things, and openness to be in relationship with other people, ironically, become the superpower. So I'll be damned, he was right. The generalist and having a generalist sensibility and adaptability is probably going to be a really valuable skill. Now, the second part of that is if you look at especially the US economic structure and society, we have done a really poor job of restraining and in many cases kind of killing vocational education. So college track is the only track. And when I look at the current economic conditions, so the first time really in the history of technology where there's no guarantee of having a gainful employment long term with a computer science degree. I mean, it has really changed quickly. I mean, Claude Code, we're doing a CTO search right now. And the expectation is that, yeah, no, it's all going to be done in Cloud Code. That the whole platform is being designed around that. So that means less people doing that production work, right? So I look at vocational education and I look at, if my kids were interested in the trades as an example, huge opportunities. If anyone is listening to this podcast as a homeowner, good luck finding an electrician or a plumber or, a roofer or whatever, landscape architect, whatever. I just the physical aspect of life in those trades have been viewed as not, for some, a viable path, and I think they're incredibly viable because not only can they create gainful, consistent employment, but many of those trades can lead to robust, blossoming entrepreneurial paths. I have a friend who moved from Florida, was an electrician, started with one truck, you know, one guy, one truck, and then two trucks, three trucks, four trucks, 10 trucks, and has made a really amazing business out of being a tradesman person.
Yeah,
So,
I say that pattern also for people. Let's say that you have a musical, you play music, you're in a band, right? And which you were, you played jazz. I come from people who do a lot of music, and the things that you learn in those early years of setting up events, communicating with strangers, doing a tour, So I do think that I agree with you. There are certain jobs that felt maybe silly or pie in the sky, who knows if you're going to quote make it as a musician, but having a small local business. But at the same time, those are teaching you all of these relational skills and project management skills that you might be missing if you come in strictly through a technology path or through, a design path that you get when you're out in the real world trying to make things happen in a physical space.
Yeah, and then, I go back to, let's get back to working in the field of, technology and
Sure.
innovation and design. And again, there have been decades long sort of these, softly sold guarantees. You get the degree from X university in computer science, and you're sort of guaranteed a seat. And that is changing. There are obviously always going to be huge opportunities in engineering. However, I think the folks that are really going to thrive because the base tools are getting so good, so the need to be in the weeds with the code is different now, and it will continue to get better. So it's the person who can bring leadership skills, understands how to be a great communicator, can be in touch with the wants and needs of the people on their team, can set expectations, brings a very strong listening skill and intention about listening to work. Those are the people, along with an engineering pedigree,
Mhm.
are the ones who are going to be successful because it's essential. How do you get the most out of the machine? How do you get most out of the human input? How do you blend those two things? And how do the humans still feel fulfilled?
Mhm. Okay, so we're going to go to really just kind of what you, Brooks, think of as some of the most worrisome, potentially dangerous, concerning aspects of the change that we're moving through this threshold moment. What kind of keeps you up at night, and or maybe problems you just feel like you don't have a solution for yet.
Well, it seems right now we're at a moment, specifically in this country, quite a bit different in Europe, in other parts of the world. But you know, my concern is that we're gonna have to have some regulatory constraints on AI. We're gonna have to have an open conversation about what the impacts are economically to people. We have an unprecedented wealth disparity in this country and around the world, and it's deepening, and the chasm is widening. And if it's to be believed by at least some of the large labs that, yeah, you're not going to need people to do this stuff. Well, look throughout history, and that's a condition for societal upheaval. And I can feel those initial anxieties in a lot of people in my talent community, and I've been doing this a long time. So it doesn't seem like there's an appetite for that conversation at the moment, at least domestically. But I think that is going to have to be one of the most important things we're talking about.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to have a capitalistic, because that's the society and that's the culture of the US, So it's going to have an innovation. It's going to have to be free market driven, but at the same time, it's the human is going to have to come first. Or I think that there's going to be a real challenge with sustainability.
Yeah. And what gives you hope? What makes you feel optimistic? What are you enjoying or feeling excited for in this moment?
Well, I'm the optimist. It looking at where we are, especially in the US, we've been living at these polarities. And I think that that's not uncommon in historic, constructive, like sort of polarity energy ends up in the ability to create something new. And I think it's been tough and painful for many people, including myself, of kind of, where we are as a country and like, some of the values that I grew up with, I think are not in alignment, with mine. But again, these polarities inevitably release. We don't stay at polarity. The human body wants to get to homeostasis, right? If we allow it. So I think that that's my hope is that, is gritty and as gnarly as it is at times, that I think that there's something cool around the corner. And I think that, human fear is a thing, but it's never as bad as we think it is. It just isn't. And a lot of the things that we think are going to happen don't happen. Right? Our brains are there to be a prediction machine. Our brains are there to protect us. And, sometimes that voice just needs to chill a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing I say to myself before I jump into a situation that feels high stakes, right, is I say, it's going to be a mixed bag out there. It's not other than that.
6-7?
It's not going to be other than that. Yeah, like maybe Brooks is looking at me. I'm giving the 6-7 kind of balancing
It's
out.
going to be a 6-7.
It's going to be a real 6-7 out there. So, but in a way, we are lucky to be alive in this threshold moment with each other and being able to connect and talk about and witness this change and in some ways try to prepare for it, even though it can be difficult to grasp and put our arms around. I want to thank you. This has been a really fascinating conversation. I knew you'd be a great first person on this podcast series, and I just appreciate you being here, Brooks.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. I appreciate you as well.
All right, cool. Okay, I'd love to thank you for listening to our guest today. As a reminder, this spring, the People and Culture team at Tao has taken over the pod. We're exploring the human side of the massive tech shifts happening right now. And each week, we're talking to a different Portland leader about what they're seeing in their work and personal lives, and what that means for the rest of us as we navigate rapid change. I'm your host, Kate Cockrell, leadership coach, trainer, and co-founder at Skill Charter. If this conversation sparked something for you, I'd love to hear about it. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just send me a DM. And if you have a story, perspective, or question you think we should share or explore, just reach out. We're building this in real time, and your feedback will help us shape what comes next.